Welcome to the 216th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Kenyon, science fiction and fantasy author, and the author of the brand new novel, At the Table of Wolves. Stay tuned for my interview with Kenyon. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Kenyon. Kenyon's newest novel, At the Table of Wolves, is published today. Kenyon's previous novels include Maximum Ice, The Braided World, and The Entire and the Rose Quartet. Kate, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Really happy to be here.
Sure. Well, can you read the first couple of pages of At the Table of Wolves?
This is an early scene from At the Table of Wolves. In this scene, Kim Tavistock is a guest at a grand English home, along with a handsome German, supposedly a businessman, named Erich von Ritter. Her hostess is Georgiana. In this scene, Kim and von Ritter are in a gazebo on a spit in the river near the house and are stranded by the rising water. Using her talent for hearing the truth most people wish to hide, a talent called a spill, she learns a key code phrase about a German military operation, chorister. They also discuss how the recent outbreak of paranormal abilities called the Bloom will affect world affairs. I love this scene because it's the first time that Kim is alone with the man who will become her adversary, an elegant and charismatic German spy. Clouded fog rolled down the river, enclosing them in whiteness. "It's freezing out here," Kim said. Von Ritter unbelted his trench coat. "Take my coat." "You'll be cold," she protested, but cigarette dangling from her lips, she shrugged into the trench coat. As they sat on the bench, Von Ritter draped the slicker over both of them, and with his arm around her shoulders, warmth returned. She was acutely aware of their shoulders touching, the intimacy of the shared garment. They smoked, listening to the river rushing by. Von Ritter seemed content to enjoy a cigarette, but silence was against her purpose. "How do you happen to know Georgiana?" Kim asked. "We met in Bonn when she was on holiday, and by chance we were both on the same train down the Rhone Gorge." He turned to regard her. "Are you warm enough? Here, come closer, or we will never make it to luncheon." "I thought you said 1 hour," she chided, but sidled into him. Heat radiated beneath the raincoat, but whether it came from him or was a flush of her own, she could not tell. He went on. "Georgiana has the German viewpoint, very forward-thinking, unlike some of your countrymen." "I can't pretend to agree." "No. I should not like you to pretend." "Is the water rising?" she asked, trying to see the spit through the gazebo door. "I cannot tell from here. I would have to get up from our snug nest to see," he said good-naturedly. After a few minutes, Kim ventured, "There may be a war, your country and mine." "It need not come to that." He adjusted his arm around her shoulder. "Lean into me, for warmth. It does no harm until we are enemies." It was only sharing a rain slicker in a storm, and even if he was a Nazi, he could hardly be motivated to throw her in the river. "We do not need a war of arms. It is rather a war of ideas," he said. "We are on the eve of a great change, Miss Tavistock. The Bloom. It has changed everything. It is a new regime, hovering so close we do not think to look up to see it envelop us." The rain crackled on the gazebo roof, streaming down off the eaves. "We don't know what it will really mean for any of us," she said. "It means that great men will rise." "Does it?" "It means that great leaders will become prophets of change. We have such a man in Germany." He glanced sideways at her. "Whatever you may think of us." He flicked his cigarette into the river. In this country, you have no great men. Churchill is a 19th century throwback, still yearning for empire. The bloom has brought us to a new level. Men of high talent who direct destinies. Choristers, if you will. Choristers? He paused as a gust of wind brought a torrent of staccato pattering on the roof. A figure of speech. Such an interesting word. Is it? Yes, as though we're all singing the same song. She added, trying for an ironic tone, Deutschland über alles. Perhaps, but a chorister will bring you down. She had not heard the word before and thought that perhaps he had used the wrong English word. Do you mean Hitler? He is a chorister? No. One of your own, he said.
Someone listening hasn't heard about At the Table of Wolves yet. How would you describe your new novel?
It's a story of the interwar years in England in 1936, when psi talents have come into the world and are both highly desired and highly suspect. And they are being used in a shadow war to fight the Nazis.
And do you remember the original idea or impetus for At the Table of Wolves?
Yes, I do. I was reading the William Manchester series of biographies of Winston Churchill, and I just fell in love with the 30s. And since there's so much historical fantasy, but people are always looking for a new time period to explore and introduce magic. And I thought the 30s was one that had not been very well exploited. And I found the 30s just that fascinating as a time, especially one that that could engender conflict and drama.
And did you end up doing a lot of research about the 1930s and World War II while writing At the Table of Wolves?
Yes, both World War I and World War II, in the interwar period especially, as well as many books on espionage and the tradecraft. But I read probably 20 books on the 30s espionage.
Sorry, you broke up there, so I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I said I probably read 20 books on the 30s, World War I, and espionage.
Was there anything that particularly surprised you in the research that you did that maybe made it into the books, or maybe didn't even make it into the books but surprised you?
Well, yes. I was quite taken with the notion that people, having gone through World War I, where so many lives were lost, and the trauma, especially for England, of every family having lost 1, 2, or even 3 sons in the war, how it overshadowed the 30s. And while Hitler was building up his military and moving into an aggressive position, people just could not bear to know the truth that another conflict was coming. And so it was a time of people unable, being willfully blind to this existential threat of Nazism. And I also loved the fictional opportunities presented by all these conflicts. But as to the surprise to me was that even though this was an interwar period, there was a shadow war going, espionage and deception. So I loved the idea that was going on, and I hadn't quite understood how fraught the 30s were with conflict and spying.
Interesting. So you have a second book, Serpent and the Heather, slated for publication in April 2018. Will there be other books in the series beyond the first two?
Well, no plans at the moment, but it could certainly go on. The shtick for the second book is that my major character, Tavistock, who is kind of a citizen sleuth, has another adventure, another Nazi operation that must be uncovered. And so I could see that going on. And it has, as I say, I think the 30s has just kind of limitless potential for drama and conflict. And I would look forward to writing more books in the series. But right now, we're working on the second one.
Sure. So your books and short stories have been science fiction or fantasy. What attracts you to writing science fiction and fantasy?
The imaginative leaps that you can make, and I think you get hooked on science fiction and fantasy when you're young, and somehow through your adult years, it just maintains this pull and mystique that you enter worlds that have never been seen before. I have always had a life was deeper than what appears. And I think fantasy and science fiction give you a chance to kind of penetrate what could things be like if just this veil were parted or that. So I'm just interested in it from a kind of a mysteries standpoint. And also, in science fiction and fantasy, you have an opportunity to really make conflict and the war between good and evil more present. And so you have a chance to up the stakes. And the fatal flaw of fiction, in my view, is not bad writing, but to be boring. So science fiction and fantasy, I think, give you a chance to escape that.
Sure. So what advice do you have for aspiring writers who may be listening and want to have their own stories or novels published one day?
I think it would be to be patient. People nowadays they want instant publication. They want to put out their first thing and have it published. I think in that case, the good news is you get your book published, but the bad news is that your book is published because it might not be your best effort. If you had acquiring editor serving as a gateway into the publishing world, you might be pushed to work a little harder and raise your craft up to the next level. It took me 8 years to break in. I don't recommend that as a path necessarily, but I think people should not be surprised and be prepared psychologically to put in your 10,000 hours of study and writing and not try to rush.
And so what kept you going during those 8 years?
I have no idea. I know that there's a mystique about writing and a sense that it is an exotic life, and people just have an image of how wonderful it's going to be. And I felt that way too. What can I make of my life that would be exciting and different? And I was just that determined to penetrate this industry and see my name there with other writers whose work I've been following for decades. So but in the end, you don't know what keeps you going, why you reach for that golden ring, despite so many obstacles, actually, that they're hard of publication.
So what books, fiction or nonfiction, have you read recently that made an impression on you and that you would recommend?
Well, I loved, let's say, Ian Tregillis, who wrote The Mechanical. It's a story of a robot with consciousness. I just thought it was beautifully written. I just finished reading a fantasy that I quite loved called The Bear and the Nightingale. Forgetting the author right now, but it's based on Russian mythology, which is a lovely change. Speaking of books on mythology, Naomi Novik's Uprooted is just a delight. In non-science fiction and fantasy, I'm a big fan of Alan First, who writes espionage novels. I could recommend The Spies of Warsaw or his Night Soldiers books. I have a long list of espionage novels. Not sure our readership will, your listenership wants to hear all of those, but yeah, I'm enjoying reading books on World War I that are set there. This isn't a recent book, but I loved Kim Newman's The Bloody Red Baron. It's just a wonderful take on vampires in the First World War, and it's just absolutely one of my favorites.
Great. So where can people find you online if they're interested in learning more about you and your books?
Well, my website, kkenyon.com, and and I'm on Twitter and Facebook. But yeah, I'd love to connect with readers in those forums.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Kay Kenyon. Her new novel, At the Table of Wolves, is in bookstores now, so go grab a copy or buy the ebook. And Kay, thanks for doing this interview.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It was a delight